Alright, the Paradise Paradox. Prepare for the electric shocks. Wisdom worth more than all the gold that's probably already been stolen from Fort Knox. So if you're ready to open your mind, let's let loose the locks. So here's another episode I'm talking about propaganda. Now you might have learned a little about propaganda in high school, but you probably haven't thought too much about how it's applied to your everyday life, and everybody's trying to get a piece of your brain real estate and use it up for their own malicious or benevolent purposes, depending on the person. So let's have a look at that. And remember to jump on over to theparadiseparadox.com, have a look through our episodes, www.theparadiseparadox.com/103 is an interesting episode where I discuss some ideas, opening your mind about why someone would possibly want to deceive the world into thinking that it's actually flat. And you can jump onto iTunes and have a look at that. Subscribe on iTunes. You can jump onto YouTube. You can follow us on Facebook. Follow me on Twitter. I'm at Trouble Bubble. Aaron is at BattleAZ. That's AYZEE. And jump on over to our website and you see the donate button at the top. So we are funded mostly by your generous donations, your tips. So we do appreciate it when you show us a little love in the form of money. Nothing like love when it comes in form that's easily spendable. So jump on over to donate.theparadiseparadox.com. We appreciate it when you give us a little donation that way. So let's get into it. Principle number 1. Every form of communication is actually propaganda. So when someone's trying to communicate something to you, they're actually trying to get their ideas, whether they be facts or opinions, and launch them and plant them in your brain. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that propaganda is bad, that all propaganda is bad. I like to make this analogy to compare it to food. So everybody who is selling food wants you to buy that food and wants you to eat more of that food. That doesn't necessarily mean the food that they're selling is bad. Some of it is good, some of it is bad. It doesn't necessarily mean when you eat that food, you need to be consciously or constantly paranoid that you're going to eat poison. But there are foods out there which have some kind of poisons in them. So, same thing with propaganda. Not everybody is trying to poison you. Not all propaganda is bad. Some of it is good. But you have to be aware of what's going on, because there's a bunch of people out there who are trying to get inside your head. And you have to be aware that when they're pushing something out to you, it's not necessarily just something so innocent, even if they have good intentions. So there's this classic example from The Psychology of Persuasion by Cialdini, and he talks about this UFO cult, and this UFO cult believes that the world is going to end, and if they all band together in this warehouse and pray to the aliens, then they won't die. And then the cult around this stage was probably pretty small in numbers, probably less than 1,000 members. When it came to the day, what happened was that the clock struck midnight or whatever, the Earth was supposed to explode and nothing happened. So the leader of the cult had to justify it and said, the aliens have saved us, they've taken mercy. And of course, what you would expect after that would be that the group would disband and say, well, this is a bunch of bullshit. But what actually happened, because they've invested all of their money, they've sold all their earthly possessions. This is literally the only thing they had in the world, is this belief in this misled cult leader, or this manic cult leader. So they had to continue with it. Now, when they continued trying to spread out the message of this UFO cult, on the surface they had good intentions, because what they wanted was for people to be saved from the world blowing up or whatever it was. But on a deeper level, they were actually in denial. So that means it's really a problem, because you can assess someone, you can look at someone and say, this person has good intentions, this is a good person. That doesn't necessarily mean that what they're saying is good. As they're saying, the path to hell is paved with good intentions. So you can't measure someone on their intentions alone. You have to look at them in a little more detail. So just because you trust someone doesn't necessarily mean you should believe everything they say. Principle number 2, meta-communication. So everybody knows in movies you have this thing called product placement. So you have something like the situation. You have this really cool guy, James Bond. He's wearing a suit. Everybody knows he's a lady killer. He does cool shit. He protects the innocent, or protects the queen, or whatever the fuck he does. Everybody knows he's a cool guy. So that means when James Bond talks about Volkswagen, or you see him wearing a particular watch, that's cool by association. And so they've got this free pass into you there. So they don't even need to make the case. They don't even need to say, hey, this watch is really cool. It has this feature and that feature. They don't need to make an argument. They just launch it right into your brain. That's an easy example that everybody knows. But then you have things which maybe you don't think so much about. So, for example, you have like a professor at the front of the class. There's 50, 100, 200 people listening to him. He's the focal point of attention for the class. And basically what he says goes in terms of that class. People find it much more difficult to question him than they would their fellow students. He's the one speaking generally, and so people have to supplicate to him. He has the higher status. So what's the meta-communication is here. What I'm saying is important. What I'm saying is worthy of value, worthy of consideration. And if you took the same exact words from that professor and wrote them on a bathroom wall, people probably wouldn't consider them so seriously. But because of the medium is the message, and that means these words get more weight. The same thing would say a president giving a speech before the Congress. They're all standing there, a lot of them are clapping. That gives like this pre-approval, and that means whatever he says is going to kind of seep into your brain. And this is natural, like this is something unconscious. It's probably going to happen to you for the rest of your life, more or less. But you can become aware of it to some extent, be aware of your own prejudices, and be aware of the ways that people are manipulating you in order to change your perspective on ideas which might otherwise seem kind of silly. Another case is, say you have a friend who you trust, he's a good person, he's reliable, he always tells the truth, but one day he tells you a lie. And he might even look off to the side. He doesn't make eye contact. He seems kind of nervous about it. But you let it pass because he's established all this credibility beforehand. So the meta-communication so strong through the years or through the months that you've known this fellow, it overwrites the communication of the moment, which is this guy is looking very nervous right now, and maybe I shouldn't trust him. So that's another case of where this long-established credibility or this meta-communication can override what you might normally consider to be a good idea, or what you might consider to be good behavior. The third principle is good propaganda doesn't look like propaganda. So it's a related point. but common propaganda technique is to start an article talking about something that you know, something that you trust, and then in the middle of the article, you move towards something which is the real propaganda, which is the heart of it. So people are already reading through this article and they're going, yep, I agree with this, I agree with this. So by the time you've established a credibility and get into the heart of it, they will just keep on agreeing with you, regardless of if what you said makes sense or not. You're already well established. So the lesson is, I mean, you can't switch off halfway through. If you're going to be aware of your own mind, and if you're going to stay on the ball and not be manipulated, you've got to be critical for the entire way. So even if somebody presents you something and this person has a long-standing reputation with you, you can't just switch off because maybe somebody got to that person, maybe somebody bought off that person, maybe that person is just mistaken, they're being misled or whatever. So the reputation isn't enough. I mean, it's a factor to take in, but it's not enough. And nor is, I mean, the leading in paragraphs of an article are nowhere near enough to establish a good reputation. There's something, but don't take it that seriously. So I had this good example. I'll probably go into it in detail sometime because this article still floats around the internet sometimes. This article is about, well, ostensibly it's about philosophy by a philosophy professor, and he starts off the article talking about you're entitled to your own opinion and so what, something like that. So everybody's entitled to their opinion, that's what people say, but to make an opinion worthwhile, to make it something valuable and give it a persuasive effect, then it has to have evidence behind it or an argument or something, which is the case he makes in the opening points of the article. And it seems very reasonable, like just about any rational person would agree with that. Even people who don't act that way would probably still believe that. By the time he gets about halfway through the article, he starts talking about, he starts giving these examples, slightly contrived examples. So this is an extract from the article after he gets past the introduction and starts presenting them what is supposed to be the meat of his case, which is actually these examples which have these little sneaky phrases which will get into your mind and bury themselves in like earthworms. If everyone's entitled to their own opinion just means no one has the right to stop people thinking and saying whatever they want, then the statement is true, but fairly trivial. No one can stop you saying that vaccines cause autism, no matter how many times that claim has been disproven. So this is a particularly poignant case because in the beginning of the article, he's saying how important it is when you have opinion, you have to be able to back it up. But in the middle of the article, he can just jam this right in there, saying that vaccines don't cause autism and it's been disproven all these amount of times without backing it up at all. So he's got a free pass on you. And that's why it's so sneaky. I even talked to my friend about this, and I tried to point it out what he was doing in this article several times. And my friend said, "Well, no, it's an article about philosophy. It's not supposed to present arguments about vaccines." And I said, "Yeah, it is, and that's exactly what makes it such good propaganda. That you can just jam it right in there." With leaving it unquestioned. Now, of course, a lot of people will say, well, vaccines don't cause autism. That's fine, not really the point. The point is, he got a free pass. He got that information in there without you having to question it because he's just providing it as an example of his greater point. Actually, I think Patrick Stokes wrote this entire article around the premise that he wanted to disparage a certain anti-vaccine activist and that he wanted to slip in a few things about how vaccines don't cause autism. That's, to me, that's how that article appears. You might have a different opinion. I'll put the link in the notes. The point is, no one should get a free pass on you, not even me. Don't let anyone sneak anything in and just accept it blindly. Even if they make a little thing, as an example or something like that, that's how they're going to sneak it in, so it gets beyond the radar. Another example was when I was staying at my parents' place, and I noticed this critical thinking pamphlet on the coffee table, and I picked it up, and it has like the government seal, New South Wales or Australian government seal. So instantly, to some people, this has credibility, respectability, authority, and all those sorts of nonsense ideas. So going through the propaganda, it's talking about critical thinking and talking about ad hominem fallacies and why you should look at the evidence and don't just jump on the bandwagon and that sort of thing. But towards the end of the book, I noticed it said, gave this example, and it said the reason anthropogenic climate change is a problem isn't because a whole bunch of people believe it is. The reason it is because it's backed up by facts, by science. Again, it's a great example because ostensibly the book isn't even about, or the pamphlet isn't even about global warming. So why would it matter if they use this little example? But they can sneak that right in there without having to defend it. And the beautiful irony is it's supposed to be this pamphlet about critical thinking. So that gives you, again, this air of respectability. Like, well, I read in this critical thinking pamphlet that it's critical to think that global warming is real and a threat. Again, you might think catastrophic anthropogenic climate change is a real thing. Not really the point. The point is they got a free pass. Point number 4, again, related point. The best propagandists are magicians. They are experts at putting your attention exactly where they want it. So there's a classic example of a technique that you'll see from many politicians, from many public speakers, and even many con men. So what they'll do is when somebody asks them a question and they don't want to answer the question, the first thing to start off with is say, that's a great question. I'm so glad you asked that question. You'll see Trump drop this bomb many times. And then, of course, they go off and they don't answer the question at all, or they answer it in a way which isn't really answering it. So I've got this example here, David Mayer de Rothschild. So let's have a little look.
I'd like to know your opinion about the burgeoning ClimateGate scandal and the IPCC fraudulent emails that have been leaked out, which basically show that the data has been toyed with for decades. And effectively, there's no way to really determine that there's any global warming going on at all.
No, listen, I'll answer that straight away. No, and I appreciate your viewpoint, and I totally respect that. That's the end of the day, that's what opinions are for, and that diversity in opinions is what creates change, and curiosity creates change. And, the reality is that climate science is a very, very broad area, and there's many variables in climate modeling that's outside of our control. And unfortunately, because of the pure nature of that has been used extensively by individuals and corporations and governments to manipulate the system, to be able to try and tell us a story that our planet isn't actually changing because of, our impact. And we start to create this very futile debate. And it is a futile debate, because at the end of the day, we're only kidding ourselves. No one else is going to lose out apart from us, and our children, and their children, and their children, right? And so what we have to do is we have to say, okay, let's park that issue, right? Because we're never going to get an agenda that's a global governance agenda, as we saw in Copenhagen, because there's too many vested interests. But let's focus on the things that are fingerprints that are undeniable. The plastic in our ocean, the degradations of our forests, the degradation of topsoil, the collapse of our marine fisheries. Pollution is rife. And you know what? 100 years ago there wasn't plastic. And now we've got fingerprints everywhere that are poisoning our children, poisoning us, and are causing undeniable damage to our natural systems. And they are blocking up the code of nature. And so when we look at it, it says, you know what, if you don't believe in that, just go outside and look at what's going on around you. Look at the loss of all these things that we need to support us. Nature is our life support system. So the argument, and if you've been dragged into it, then basically you're a chess piece in the game of big business that is using you to try and believe that we aren't having an impact. Believe me, we are.
So this is such a great piece. Again, this is a beautiful irony of a Rothschild telling you that you're dragged into being a chess piece by big business. Holy shit. How does he keep a straight face? But so you see he goes in there. He uses that technique from the start. Hey, that's a great question. Or hey, I really respect that. I'm glad we've got different viewpoints. Then he goes in, categorizes. He actually does this kind of backflip, and he says, well, governments have used this data to manipulate it to appear like it hasn't happened, which the question was about the exact opposite. It was about ClimateGate, saying how ClimateGate was this release of data where they manipulated it. I'll put some links in so you can have a look at the leaks yourself. Then the thing is, he says, okay, it's a futile debate. So he's characterizing, this is like this sneaky little indirect character attack towards a person who's asking the question, like you're telling them that that this person is trying to derail it or something like that, or we're getting caught up on details. But what I have to say is actually the important thing. And then he says, let's park that issue, which is an acute way of saying, let's not talk about what you just brought up. And then, he brought up some valid points at the end, talking about things that we can measure, and that's perfectly reasonable. But he never actually answered the question, and that's the brilliant thing about it. Now, again, you might believe in anthropogenic climate change and think it's a serious problem. You might not. Not really the point. The point is, when people speak like this, it is an effective way of getting their point across, and you need to be aware, whether you agree with them or not, that they may reinforce your beliefs or detract from your beliefs just by the way they're speaking. I've got another example here where Newt Gingrich this is from a 2011 Republican debate, and it's on CNN, and Newt Gingrich at the time had been in problems because they were claiming that his ex-wife was claiming that he had asked for an open marriage. Let's see how he handles it.
As you know, your ex-wife gave an interview to ABC News and another interview with the Washington Post, and this story has now gone viral on the internet. In it, she says that you came to her in 1999, at a time when you were having an affair. She says you asked her, sir, to enter into an open marriage. Would you like to take some time to respond to that?
No, but I will. I think the destructive, vicious, negative nature of much of the news media makes it harder to govern this country, harder to attract decent people to run for public office, and I am appalled that you would begin a presidential debate on a topic like that.
Is that all you want to say, sir?
Let me finish.
Please.
Every person in here knows personal pain. Every person in here has had someone close to them go through painful things. To take an ex-wife and make it 2 days before the primary a significant question in a presidential campaign is as close to despicable as anything I can imagine.
So it's funny because you hear in that clip, it sounds like the audience applauding cuts in a little too quick. So it's like it sounds like the audio has been manipulated. I don't know if that's true. Maybe it's just the way they cut it. But so the great thing about here is like doing this skillful deflection So taking the focus off himself and saying, you're a terrible person for asking this question. Well, is it true, Newt? Is it true? Well, it kind of doesn't matter at that point. It sounds like he really paid off that audience quite well if they're really applauding like that. He must have paid quite a bit on a Rent-A-Crowd. But at the end of the clip, he does actually deny the allegations, but he didn't really have to. It wasn't really necessary because of the way he set it up, the meta-communication of so many people applauding for him and thinking that yes, it's an unfair question to ask, which is going to make you, the viewer at home, think more or less the same thing. Propagandists are magicians. They put your attention where they want to. So, okay, what are the important points? When you're watching something, when you're reading something, you might get something good from it. But what you don't want to do is carry around the bathwater with the baby. So if you're watching something on TV and somehow somebody has slipped in something about their political agenda or their idea that you should believe that the idea of a conspiracy theory is anti-American or some nonsense like that, you need to pick that up, or you need to make that distinction, because if you don't, it's just going to seep into your mind, and that's going to affect the way you think. And that's how they get a free pass, and you don't want anyone getting a free pass. So like I said at the beginning, everybody's a propagandist, everybody's trying to communicate something, everybody's trying to make you buy into their reality tunnel, just like I'm doing with you now. So don't give me a free pass. Don't let me into your brain without considering carefully the stuff I'm saying to you. So here's a quote from Edward Bernays, who you could call the godfather of propaganda, though many know him as the godfather of public relations. The conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in a democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. We are governed, our minds are molded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested, largely by men we have never heard of. This is a logical result of the way in which our democratic society is organized. Vast numbers of human beings must cooperate in this manner if they are to live together as a smoothly functioning society. In almost every act of our daily lives, whether in the sphere of politics or business, in our social conduct or our ethical thinking, we are dominated by the relatively small number of persons who understand the mental processes and social patterns of the masses. It is they who pull the wires which control the public mind. So, don't let them pull the wires on your mind. Your mind is your own. Your mind is sovereign. It belongs to you, and you should control it. You shouldn't let trespassers or freeloaders jump inside there and tinker around with the switches. As long as your mind is your own, they could take everything from you. They could take your family, your possessions, they could leave you in a box. But you'll still have the mind of a free man, and that's something which is invaluable. Conversely, if you're living in a society and you think you're free, you believe you're free, but you're not really free in your thoughts, you're being manipulated, then you are not free. Freedom must come in your mind, in your thoughts, in your vigilance of your own thoughts. As I wrote once, a lion can be held by whips in a cage. It takes an idea for a man to be enslaved. The question is, who is to be the master? Should your beliefs lead and you follow after? If an idea tells you what you can and can't know, where your mind can and cannot go, which belief systems are prohibited zones, are you a human or a drone? Take care of yourself and be well. Thanks for listening, guys. Remember to jump on over to donate.theparadiseparadox.com. We appreciate all your tips because it demonstrates to us that we're not just doing this for no reason at all. We're doing it because you enjoy it. You'll get some entertainment from it, shed some light in some dark parts of your mind, and open you up or made you laugh. Anything like that. If that's the case, then jump on over to donate.theparadiseparadox.com and give us a little tip there. Show us your appreciation. All right, I'll talk to you next time.